If you're hearing this, it means you clicked on something you shouldn't have, something I shouldn't even have. I told myself I wouldn't release this recording. I told myself I'd destroy it, burn it, bury it, anything except what I'm doing now. Speaking it out loud, letting it breathe again. But maybe that's the problem. Maybe it never stopped breathing in the first place. This is the story of the Shale Creek Incident, a case sealed so fast you'd think the earth swallowed the files whole. A case so thoroughly buried that the only reason I found out about it was because somebody, and I swear to you this is true, somebody mailed me a package with no return address. Inside were 3 things: a sheriff's department badge scratched down the center, a cassette labeled in shaky handwriting, "Not real, real, not real," and 1 torn page from an incident log stamped in red ink, "Dane County Sheriff's Office, confidential." The badge belonged to Deputy Mark Ryland, a man who vanished 22 years ago. The cassette was his final recording. And I need you to understand something before we go any further, before the whispers start, before the room feels colder. Mark didn't vanish in the way missing persons vanish. No, the sheriff's office insisted he had taken an unapproved leave of absence. They insisted he just walked away, left everything behind: house, car, job, friends. They insisted his case didn't warrant further investigation. But they locked everything else, every file, every photo, every statement, away like it was nuclear waste. That kind of secrecy, it doesn't come from a missing person case. No, it comes from fear. I listened to Mark's tape, all 47 minutes of it. The sound warped, the edges frayed, the audio dipping in and out like someone was recording in a tunnel or a well. The first time, I thought the tape was old, damaged. But the second time, the third time, I realized the distortions weren't random. They weren't mechanical. They were responsive. Like something on the tape was reacting to my breathing, to my movement, to me. But the story I'm about to tell you, it's bigger than a cassette tape, bigger than one missing deputy. This story starts in the empty fields and forgotten roads of rural Illinois, places where corn grows taller than street signs, places where old wooden barns lean like tired skeletons, places where people tell you, don't stop on Shale Creek Road after dark, not for anything, not even for help. I used to laugh when I heard stuff like that. Urban legends, rural folklore, whatever you want to call it. But not anymore. Because everything Mark said, every memory he spilled into that tape feels too detailed, too grounded, too human to be fiction. And yet, the things he described, they're not possible. Or rather, they shouldn't be possible. Before we get into his story, I want to play you something. A few seconds from the beginning of the tape. I swear I didn't edit this. I didn't alter anything. What you're about to hear is exactly what he recorded. They said it wasn't real. They kept saying it over and over. Not real. Real. Not real. But I saw it. I heard it. And it heard me back. I didn't sleep after hearing that. Not the first night, not the second, not even after I told myself it had to be a trick of audio decay. But what if it wasn't? For weeks after receiving the package, I tried to track down anyone who remembered Mark. Most didn't want to talk. A few just shook their heads and whispered, "Should have let that road die. Should have left that field alone." One old farmer told me he remembered Mark's last patrol night. "He looked wrong," the farmer said. "Looked like he'd been hollowed out, like his face was wearing him instead of the other way around." I don't scare easily, but that got to me. Still, nothing prepared me for the moment I actually played the tape all the way through, especially what Mark described on that deserted stretch of Shale Creek Road. The abandoned pickup truck, the footprints that stopped mid-stride, the cornfield shifting with no wind, the voice calling his name in his own voice. And before you think this is just a ghost story or some creepypasta, it isn't. This is based on real logs, real names, real timestamps, real missing persons. Everything you're about to hear is grounded in actual case fragments and rural reports that were never supposed to see the light of day. People disappeared out there. Families were left without answers. And the sheriff who dismissed Mark's report? He retired early. His obituary mentions dementia, but locals claim he spent his last weeks muttering about the thing in the fields wearing his shadow. There's one more thing I need to tell you. Something I haven't admitted publicly before. When I first finished listening to Mark's recording, I heard something whisper behind me. But I live alone, and I hadn't spoken. The whisper said, "Not real. Real. Not real." I turned around so fast I knocked over a lamp. But there was nothing there. Nothing but the empty room and the tape recorder still hissing. But ever since then, I've had this feeling, like someone's standing just behind me, watching over my shoulder, waiting for me to speak so it can speak back. You hear that? Good. Because now you know the tone of what's coming next. This is Deputy Mark Ryland's final night on Shale Creek Road. This is the story he died trying to tell. Take a breath. Lean in. Don't look behind you. And remember, not real. Real. Not real. Mark always said the fields in Dane County felt different at night. Not dangerous, not haunted, just aware. Listening. Like everything stood still when you stepped into its territory. He transferred into the sheriff's department in late October, the kind of Midwest cold that creeps into your sleeves and settles between your ribs. He had requested night patrols, said he liked the quiet, said the stillness helped him think, said the roads out here reminded him of where he grew up. But from the moment he arrived, he noticed something wrong with the silence. Not empty, not peaceful, just wrong. The sheriff, a broad-shouldered man with a gray beard and eyes that never seemed to blink long enough, greeted him at the station door the first evening. "You'll get the easy route tonight," the sheriff said, handing in the keys to the cruiser. "Stay off Shale Creek Road." Mark raised an eyebrow. "Why?" The sheriff's jaw worked like he was chewing on something bitter. "Locals call in nonsense. Shadows in the corn, voices in the wind. Waste of time." He paused long enough to be noticeable. "Just don't go." Mark thought it was a joke at first. Small towns always had their stories. Phantom hitchhikers, old mines, abandoned barns. It was folklore, icebreakers, nothing more. He nodded, but he didn't take the warning seriously. Not yet. His first night patrol passed quietly. His cruiser rolled down endless stretches of road, the fog drifting low and white across the pavement like spilled milk. The sky above was moonless, starless, the kind of dark that swallowed everything whole. Farmhouses sat far apart, their porch lights glowing weak and yellow. Barns leaned in the distance like sleeping giants. Occasionally a dog barked from behind a fence, but even that sound seemed constrained, as though the night muted anything that didn't belong to it. Mark radioed in twice, only to be met with static the first time, and a half-interested dispatcher the second. He told himself it was fine. He liked quiet shifts. At 2:14 a.m., he saw something standing at the edge of a cornfield. At first, he thought it was a deer, a shadowy figure motionless at the field's edge. But the longer he stared, the more he realized it wasn't shaped right. Too tall, too narrow, shoulders too still, and it didn't move when the cruiser's headlights washed over it. In fact, it didn't cast a shadow at all. Mark blinked hard, leaning forward. The figure was there, solid, real. But the ground behind it stayed perfectly lit by his headlights. Not possible, Mark muttered under his breath. He flicked the spotlight toward it, and in a blink the figure slipped backward into the rows of corn without a single rustle. No sound, no stalks bending. Just gone. Mark sat still for a moment, trying to rationalize it. Maybe it was a trick of light. Maybe the fog played with depth perception. Maybe he was tired. Maybe it had been a deer, and he imagined the rest. He could almost believe that, until he looked down. On the pavement beside his cruiser, a single trail of footprints led from the road directly to where the figure had stood. Human footprints. Bare, deep, and ending abruptly at the corn's edge. Not real. Real. Not real, he whispered, not even sure why the words came to him. Dispatch crackled suddenly in his ear. Unit 6, report in. You're near Shale Creek, yeah? Mark startled. Negative, I'm not. I'm on Route 19. The dispatcher murmured, sounding uneasy. Strange interference. Thought you were on Shale Creek. Mark said nothing. He felt the back of his neck prickle, like someone was standing just behind him, like someone was leaning close, listening to his breathing. He rolled the window up, locked the doors. He didn't know why. Instinct, maybe. The cornfield behind him swayed, but there was no wind. He should have driven off then. He should have turned around and left the field to its shadows. But Mark was a deputy, and curiosity was a stubborn thing. Dangerous, too. He stepped out of the cruiser. His flashlight beam cut through the fog like a narrow tunnel, illuminating the first few rows of corn. Silence pressed in, thick and heavy. County Sheriff, he called out. If someone's out here, say something. Nothing. No rustle, no voice, no movement. The corn was too still. Mark backed away, hands tightening around the flashlight. Something felt wrong. Not just eerie. Wrong. The moment he reached the cruiser door, the radio crackled again, but this time it wasn't dispatch. It was his own voice, whispering. Mark, don't look back. He spun, pointing the flashlight into the field. There was nothing. The air seemed to freeze. The corn went silent again, and the fog thinned enough for him to see his breath form in clouds in the cold. He climbed back into the cruiser and slammed the door shut. Hand trembling, he whispered, Not real. Real. Not real. He didn't know it yet, but that was the exact moment Shale Creek chose him. He didn't sleep the next morning, didn't eat, didn't call anyone. He just sat at his kitchen table, staring at the badge beside his coffee mug, replaying that whisper in his head. His own voice, perfectly pitched, perfectly timed. Something had called his name in the middle of an empty cornfield. Something that sounded like him. And that was only the beginning. Mark didn't file the report. He told himself he would, that he'd go into the station first thing in the morning and explain everything clearly, step by step. But when dawn crept through the blinds and lit the badge on his kitchen table, something inside him resisted. He couldn't explain why. It felt dangerous, as if speaking it out loud would give it shape, give it permission. So he kept quiet, drank a cup of coffee that tasted like metal, sat in silence until the sun lifted fully over the fields. And then he put the badge back on. He didn't want to return to Shale Creek Road. He told himself he wouldn't. But by the second night of his shift, fate didn't give him a choice. It was 1:37 a.m. when dispatch called him. "Unit 6, we've got an abandoned vehicle off Shale Creek Road. Caller reported it 90 minutes ago but hung up before we could ask for details. Sheriff wants you to check it out." Mark paused before answering. His fingers hovered over the radio mic. His breath fogged the windshield. He didn't want to go. Every instinct screamed against it. But the moment he hesitated, the radio hissed, and through that hiss came a faint whisper, layered under static. His own voice again. "Go." Mark's blood ran cold. He forced a steady tone into the mic. "Copy that. En route." Inside, he was shaking. Shale Creek Road was darker than the night before. Not normal darkness, heavy darkness, like the sky had collapsed and was pressing down on the asphalt. Even the cruiser headlights seemed thinner, swallowed inches beyond the bumper. When he spotted the truck, his stomach dropped. It sat at a slant on the shoulder, driver door open wide, dome light glowing faint yellow against the fog. The engine was off, keys still dangling in the ignition. Mark approached slowly. His flashlight beam shook. "County Sheriff," he called out. "Is anyone here? Hello?" Silence. He leaned inside the cab. There were 2 coffee cups in the holder, both half full, a flannel jacket on the passenger seat, a cell phone face down on the floor mat with a cracked screen. But no people. No signs of a struggle. Nothing. He turned to survey the ground and froze. Footprints. A clear trail of them leading from the truck toward the cornfield. The prints were deep, pressed into the damp soil, but halfway to the field, they just stopped. Not faded, not trampled. Stopped. As if whoever made them simply vanished mid-step. Mark's heartbeat thudded in his ears. "Not real. Real. Not real," he whispered. He followed the tracks until they ended. The final footprint looked almost unfinished, as if the heel did not have time to fully press down. Mark's flashlight snapped toward the sound. "Hello?" he called out, voice cracking slightly. "If you can hear me, say something." At first, only the fog answered. Then, "Mark." His name, soft, gentle, spoken exactly the way he himself would say it. His tone, his rhythm, his own voice. The corn, impossibly still moments before, rustled in a tight circle around him. Not randomly, deliberately, like something was circling, watching. Mark took a step back, hand reaching for his holster. "Show yourself!" he shouted, but his voice wavered. Something moved deeper in the corn. Not walking, gliding. A dark shape growing taller as it neared the edge. The stalks parted. Out stepped a figure. Not quite man, not quite shadow. Something in between, blurred around the edges as though it hadn't finished forming. Its body shifted with a soft, impossible stutter like a video buffering. Mark raised the flashlight. The beam hit the thing's face. It had no features. Just a smooth, colorless surface, like skin stretched over an empty frame. Yet it tilted its head at him, in the exact way Mark tilted his head when he was confused. Exactly. He felt his knees weaken. It took one step forward, then another. The closer it moved, the more its shape changed. Lines sharpening, height adjusting, limbs narrowing. It was learning his silhouette, trying to match him. "No, no, no," Mark whispered. The figure twitched as if imitating the way he spoke. Then it tried again, this time with sound. "No, no!" A perfect copy of his own shaking voice. Mark stumbled backward, flashlight nearly dropping. He fumbled for his radio, but before he could speak, over the radio came his voice, clear, calm, completely unlike the real Mark in that moment. "Unit 6, situation secure." Mark froze. The dispatcher answered instantly, unaware. "Copy, Unit 6. Confirm return to patrol." Mark tried to shout into the mic. "Dispatch, that's not me!" But the radio drowned his words in static. The figure's head twitched again, like it heard him, like it understood the panic in his voice. Suddenly it rushed forward, jerking unnaturally. Mark stumbled back toward the cruiser, boots slipping on the gravel. He aimed the flashlight one last time, and the figure was inches from him. Too close. Wrongly close. He didn't see it move, he only saw it arrive. Mark gasped, falling into the driver's seat and slamming the door. He locked it with shaking fingers. Outside, the figure stood motionless, watching him, learning him. Its shoulders rose and fell, imitation breathing. Then, slowly, it lifted its hand and mimicked knocking on the window. Except the sound came from the opposite window, the back one, behind him. Mark jerked around. Nothing there. Just his own reflection in the dark. He turned back to the front. The figure had vanished. Gone. No footsteps, no sound. Only fog swirling where it had stood. Mark drove away so fast he nearly fishtailed off the road. His chest heaved. His mouth tasted like iron. Whatever stood in that cornfield, it wasn't human. It wasn't animal. And it wanted something from him. Something it had begun imitating. Something it wanted to become. As he sped down the dark road, Mark whispered to himself again, a mantra of desperation. Not real. Real. Not real. But deep inside, he already knew the truth. Something out there wanted to wear him, and it had already started learning how. Mark didn't sleep after the second night. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw that shape. Not a creature, not a person, something between. He kept telling himself it wasn't real, but the whisper looping through his mind always countered him. Not real. Real. Not real. By noon, he was still in uniform, sitting at his kitchen table with the lights off. The sun made thin lines across the floor, but they didn't feel warm. They felt like weak fingers trying to drag him back into the day. He couldn't shake the feeling from the night before, the sensation that something had mimicked him perfectly. And worse, the knowledge that the dispatcher believed the mimic's voice was his. That wasn't just an encounter. That was infiltration. He finally forced himself up, badge heavy on his chest, and drove to the station. The sheriff was in his office, door open, eyes glued to an old logbook he snapped closed the moment Mark stepped in. "What happened out there last night?" the sheriff asked without looking up. Mark took a breath. Something, was in the cornfield. It was copying me. My shape, my voice. The sheriff winced without meaning to. A flinch, a twitch of fear. "So you saw it too," Mark whispered. The sheriff stiffened. "Stop. You didn't see anything except a trespasser. A confused one, maybe drunk, maybe high. It used my voice." The sheriff's jaw tightened until muscle pulsed along the side of his face. "You're tired, Ryland. You're new here. Folks new to the night shift get jumpy. These fields do things to perception. You'll adjust." "No," Mark said quietly. "I won't." Silence. The room felt thin, fragile. The sheriff finally sighed. "If you know what's good for you, stay away from Shale Creek. And don't talk about it. Not to me, not to anyone." "So you do know?" "Ryland," the sheriff said sharply, voice cracking like a whip. "I'm trying to help you." He wasn't. He was afraid. Mark left without filing a report. Mark needed answers. If the sheriff wasn't going to give them, he'd find them himself. He dug through old logs, had to get creative, find the ones buried in outdated cabinets and drawers jammed with unrelated paperwork. What he found made his stomach twist. Scattered across decades were similar calls. 1968. Impersonator in the fields. Caller reported a man standing outside her window matching her son's height. 1972. Deputy's voice heard on radio after he'd already signed out for the night. 1989. Child reported hearing his father calling him from the corn. Father was confirmed to be inside the house. 1997. Unidentified figure matching responding officer's silhouette seen moving toward cruiser. None of the cases led to arrests. None had clear endings. Many were labeled inconclusive or retracted. None of them mentioned Shale Creek directly, but locations matched the surrounding roads. Patterns. Clear patterns. Mark found a report from a deputy named Fletcher dated 1974. The note in the margin read, "It learns the voice last. That's when you should run." A chill slid through Mark's spine. His voice. It had used his voice on the radio. Behind him, the station's old fluorescent lights flickered, twice, and from somewhere deep in the hallway, he heard a faint whisper. "Mark." He spun around. Nothing there. The lights buzzed back to full brightness. He slammed the logbook shut and left the station fast enough that he didn't even say goodbye to the night shift coming in. Mark drove to a farmhouse near Shale Creek, owned by the old man who gave him a wary look his first day on duty. Name, William Mercer, retired farmer, lived alone. When Mark knocked, the door opened only a crack.
"You shouldn't be out here in daylight, Deputy," the old man said. "It listens. Sleeps, maybe, but it listens."
Mark swallowed. "What's on Shale Creek Road?" Mercer's eyes narrowed. "You saw it." Mark didn't answer, which was answer enough. Mercer stepped aside. "Quick then, talk inside." Mark entered. The house felt stale, windows covered by layered curtains. Small charms hung above the door frames, handmade, woven from straw and twine. "Old things," Mercer said, noticing his stare. "Old protections. Might help, might not." Mark sat. "Tell me what you know." Mercer lowered himself into a creaking chair. "My granddad was the first to talk about it. Said there was something in the fields that wasn't born here. Came from somewhere, outside the lines of things. It watches, it learns, it tries to become." "Become what?" Mercer's eyes looked glassy. "Whatever it sees last." Mark felt the blood drain from his face. And it copies voices? It copies everything, Mercer whispered. But it's slow at first, clumsy, human-shaped, but wrong. Over time, though. He hesitated. You've been hearing things that sound like you. Mark didn't answer. That's when it's close, Mercer said. That's when it's choosing. Choosing what? Mark asked, voice barely above a whisper. Mercer leaned in. You. Mark's breath shook. Why me? Sometimes it picks someone at random. Sometimes someone notices it when they shouldn't. Sometimes someone looks too long, and sometimes, Mercer's voice lowered, it picks the ones nobody would miss. That last sentence hit Mark harder than it should have. It rang true in a way he didn't like. How do I stop it? Mark asked. Mercer's fingers twisted the straw charm hanging around his wrist. You don't, the old man's voice cracked. You run. You don't answer your name. You don't go where it calls you. And for the love of God. He grabbed Mark's arm with surprising strength. Don't speak if you hear yourself talking. The room felt suddenly claustrophobic. Mark stood. I need to see the site in daylight. Mercer's grip tightened. You go back there, he whispered, and it'll show you more. Because it wants you to understand. It wants you to be afraid. Mark pulled his arm free. He was afraid. More afraid than he wanted to admit. But he left the farmhouse anyway. He returned to Shale Creek Road as the sun began to drop behind the corn. The air felt heavier, the fields quieter. He stepped out onto the gravel shoulder, and there, in the dirt where the footprints had ended the night before, he saw something new. A handprint, pressed deep, long, too long, and the fingers overlapping, as if someone had tried to press down 5 times at once. Mark's throat tightened. Something had come back. Something had grown closer, and it was learning faster now, much faster. Mark left Shale Creek Road with the last trace of sunlight fading behind him, but the fear didn't stay in the fields. It followed him, clung to him, crawled under his skin like cold fingers tracing his nerves. He didn't go home right away, didn't feel safe there, didn't feel safe anywhere. But eventually the exhaustion won, and he pulled into his driveway, headlights sweeping across the front porch, illuminating the thin curtains he'd closed tightly that morning. Everything looked normal, too normal. Mark stepped inside. The house was quiet, still. The kind of stillness that feels staged. He set his keys on the table, sat on the couch, tried to breathe. But the moment the room settled, he heard it. A soft knock on the wall. One tap, then another. Mark froze. Hello? He said cautiously. A voice answered immediately, from outside the house, right behind the thin living room wall. Mark. Not quite whisper, not quite voice. Too close. Mark felt his spine lock. He moved slowly toward the window, keeping low, peered outside. Nothing. Just his yard, his mailbox, the gravel road. No footprints, no shadow. Nothing. He closed the curtain again and backed away. That's when it happened. The voice called out again, but this time it wasn't outside. It came from his kitchen. Mark. Mark spun so hard he nearly lost his balance. The kitchen was empty. Another whisper came from behind him, then another, and another. The house was filling with whispers. His name spoken in different tones, different volumes, different versions of his own voice. Real, not real. Real, not real. Mark pressed his hands over his ears. "Stop!" he shouted. Silence slammed into the house like a door shut on a scream. For a moment, Mark thought it was over. Then the phone rang. Mark stared at it. 5 rings. 6. 7. He finally picked up. "Hello?" Silence on the other end. Just a faint static hiss. Then, "Why are you still here, Mark?" His own voice, calm, emotionless, speaking from the other side of the line. Mark felt everything inside him go cold. He slammed the phone down, ran to his bedroom, closed the door, locked it. He sat against the wall, knees to his chest, staring at the door like something was about to walk through it. The house settled with slow creaks. Floorboards whispered. The heater clicked. Tiny sounds, normal sounds, became monstrous. Finally, he forced himself up and turned on every light in the house. Then he went to the bathroom. He looked in the mirror, and the reflection looked back. Just a second too late. Just a second. Not long. Not obvious. But wrong. Mark stumbled backward, knocking a toothbrush holder to the floor. He grabbed the sink, leaning in again. This time, it followed his motion correctly. But the damage was done. The fear was planted. A delayed reflection. His reflection. Real. Not real. Something was slipping. His mind or reality. By the time his night shift started again, Mark was running on less than an hour of broken sleep. Every shadow on the station walls seemed too sharp. Every voice from the break room sounded like an imitation of itself. Even the sheriff looked strange, pale, eyes rimmed with sleeplessness. "You look like hell," the sheriff muttered. Mark swallowed. "What is it on Shale Creek?" The sheriff stiffened, anger flashing across his face, the kind of anger that hides fear. "Drop it, Ryland." "I won't." The sheriff stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Some things in this county ain't meant to be understood. If you keep looking, it'll know." He paused. "It already knows too much." Mark felt the weight of those words. But then the radio crackled. "Unit 6, report in." Mark reached for his radio, but the sheriff grabbed his wrist.
"That wasn't dispatch," the sheriff said quietly. The radio hissed again, but through the static came a familiar voice.
"Mark, come back." Not dispatch. Not the sheriff. Not anyone human. His own voice. The sheriff released his wrist. "Ryland," he whispered, "you're being targeted. You need to stop answering it." Mark backed away slowly, heartbeat hammering. He wanted to run. He wanted to leave the state. He wanted to forget everything about Shale Creek. But then dispatch, the real dispatch, called in a new sighting. A dark figure, standing in a barren field, not moving, just watching, near Shale Creek Road. Mark didn't want to go, but the sheriff gave him a look that said he was too deep in now. Running wouldn't matter. Mark climbed into his cruiser, dread twisting into something sharp. The field was empty when he arrived. Empty in the wrong way, like someone had scooped all sound out of the air. He stepped out of the cruiser. A figure stood near the middle of the field, tall, still, facing him. Mark lifted his flashlight. The figure didn't move. As Mark took a step forward, the figure suddenly jumped, not physically, but in distance, 50 feet away, then blinking to 20, too fast. too sudden, too impossible. Like reality was skipping frames. Mark stumbled backward, panic surging up his throat. Not real, real, not real. The figure tilted its head and spoke. Real. In Mark's voice. The flashlight slipped from his hand and hit the dirt with a dull thump. He ran. He didn't think, didn't breathe, just ran until the cruiser door slammed behind him. He didn't look back. Not even once. By the time he reached the station again, his hands were still shaking. The sheriff looked at him with something between pity and dread. It's choosing you, the sheriff said quietly. There's no stopping it now. Why me? Mark whispered. The sheriff didn't answer. Instead, he said, It tries on people like clothes. Mark knew, with a clarity that hollowed him, that he wasn't alone anymore, no matter where he stood, no matter what time of day it was, no matter if he closed his eyes or kept them open until they burned. Something was following him, copying him, choosing him. And now, it was getting closer. The storm arrived long before the clouds did. The air felt electric, charged, like the county itself was holding its breath. Thunder rumbled long and low, vibrating through the cruiser dashboard as Mark drove his assigned route, though he barely registered the road ahead. His hands gripped the wheel hard enough to whiten the knuckles. Every so often he'd glance at the rearview mirror, not to check the road, to check if something else was sitting in the back seat. He saw only the dark, but he no longer trusted the dark. Not after hearing his own voice whisper from inside his house. Not after seeing his reflection move a beat too slow. Not after watching the figure in the field skip closer like a broken animation. He was unraveling. Or the world around him was. Real. Not real. Real. The mantra scratched at the edges of his nerves. Then the radio erupted. Unit 6, multiple reports coming in. Shale Creek, screaming voices, unknown source. Mark's breath locked. The one place he feared most, calling him back. Sheriff's voice came through next, strained and uneasy. Ryland, don't go. A pause, then quieter. Please. But Mark was already turning the cruiser around, already heading straight into the storm. What choice do I have? He whispered. He didn't know if he meant it for himself or the thing listening. The sky split open with a violent crack of lightning. Rain hammered the windshield in sheets. Shale Creek Road came into view only when lightning illuminated it. Brief flashes revealing a twisting, empty stretch cutting through cornfields that bowed in unnatural directions, blown by a wind that didn't touch anything else. Mark slowed. The voices started immediately. Not screams, not exactly. More like layers of people calling from far away, muffled and overlapping, like dozens of recordings playing out of sync. They weren't calling for help. They were calling him. Mark. 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 His heartbeat hammered in his ears. As he drove deeper, the road began to look wrong, longer, exaggerated, like it stretched into itself. The cruiser headlights flickered, then the engine hiccuped, once, then again, before dying completely. The car rolled to a stop. Mark tried the ignition. Nothing. Just a dead click. Something was close. Mark stepped out into the storm, rain soaking him instantly. He shined his flashlight across the road. Dispatch, I'm on Shale Creek. He stopped. His radio wasn't responding. Only static. Only his own breathing mixed with it. Lightning flashed, and in that split second of stark white light, he saw them. Footprints. Dozens. Maybe hundreds. All identical. All his. Marching into the field like an army of copies. Deep, fresh impressions that sank perfectly into the mud. Mark's mouth went dry. He stepped closer slowly, rain turning the dirt under his boots slick. He knelt, touched one of the prints, still warm, still holding shape, like they had been made only moments ago. He jolted upright, spinning with flashlight raised. No one there. Just rows of corn bending slightly inward, like they were bowing toward him, or inviting him in. Mark backed away. "No," he whispered. "Not real. Not real, not." Lightning flashed again. There was a figure at the far end of the field. Tall, long-limbed, wrong. Its edges jittered, shifting between shapes, as if it were wearing multiple versions of itself, and it was facing him. Even from a distance he could feel its attention, like a hand gripping the base of his spine. He took one shaky step back toward the cruiser, then another. The figure took a step forward, then another. But its movement wasn't smooth. It lurched, skipped, like frames of reality had been cut out. Suddenly it was closer, too close, 20 feet away. Mark gasped, stumbling backward. Lightning struck again. The figure now stood at the edge of the road, 5 feet away. The rain didn't touch it, didn't cling to it, didn't acknowledge it. Mark's voice failed him. His flashlight trembled wildly in his hand. The thing tilted its head and imitated the exact angle of Mark's panic. Perfectly. Then it spoke. Not the broken mimicry from before, not the static-laced whisper, but in Mark's own voice. Flawlessly. "You've already been here before." Mark stumbled backward, falling onto the wet gravel. The figure's movements stuttered again, jerking forward, then backward, then closer, like the world couldn't decide where it belonged. And as Mark tried to crawl away, the thing stepped over him, its shape flickering between silhouettes, taller, shorter, wider, narrower, like it was struggling to settle on a final form. Lightning struck a third time, and the figure finally stabilized. It was Mark. Exactly Mark. Except the smile it wore wasn't his. It wasn't human. Mark scrambled to his feet, slipping in the mud, heart pounding so hard he felt it in his teeth. He ran for the cruiser door. Behind him, he heard his own voice call out, clear as day. "You can't outrun yourself!" Something was following him through the storm, and it was wearing him like skin it hadn't finished stitching on. Mark slammed the cruiser door behind him and locked it, even though he knew, deep down, locks didn't matter anymore. Not with that thing outside. Not with the way it moved. Not with the way it understood him. He wiped rain from his eyes with trembling hands. Thunder rolled overhead, long and jagged. Lightning flashed again. The road was empty. The figure was gone. Mark's breath shuddered. He fumbled for the radio. "This is Unit 6, he managed. I need backup. Sheriff, dispatch, anyone, there's something out here." The radio answered immediately, but not with dispatch. With him. "Backup?" The voice laughed softly, his laugh twisted into something hollow. "You don't need backup, Mark." Mark dropped the radio. He could feel it, inside the cruiser now. Not physically, worse. In the air. In his head. In the cracks between the thunder. He reached for the ignition and froze. The rear-view mirror was tilting on its own, slowly, deliberately, pointing down, toward the back seat. Mark held his breath and looked. Dark. Empty. But only for a moment. The shadows shifted, folding in on each other like cloth being pulled tight until a faint outline formed. A human shape. His shape. Sitting perfectly still, perfectly upright. Hands folded neatly in its lap. Lightning flared. The seat was empty again. Mark bolted out of the cruiser, slipping on the wet gravel. He landed hard, scraping his palms. Didn't matter. He needed to run. He needed to escape. He sprinted down the road, rain slamming into his face sideways, mud caking his boots. His breaths came ragged and sharp. His vision blurred at the edges. Behind him, footsteps. Soft at first, then overlapping. Dozens of them, all sounding exactly like his own. Mark turned, flashlight trembling in his grip. What he saw didn't make sense. Shapes emerging from the rain, figures stepping out from between the rows of corn, each one slightly different, slightly distorted. A tall version of him, a thin version, one whose limbs bent wrong, one whose head jerked like a malfunctioning puppet. All mimicking him, all walking the same way he did, all wearing faces that twitched between expressions never meant for a human mouth. Mark stumbled backward. "Stop! Stop!" he shouted, voice cracking. Every figure stopped instantly. Then, every figure tilted its head the same way, at the same angle, at the same time. Perfect imitation. Thunder split the sky, and from the center of the horde stepped the one that had followed him since the beginning. The first mimic. The unfinished one. Now perfect. Now wearing him with unsettling accuracy. Except for the smile. That broken, stretched smile that didn't match any real human emotion. Mark turned and ran into the cornfield, stalks whipping against his face. He didn't know where he was going, just deeper, deeper into the darkness between rows. The whispers followed. "Mark, Mark, you're almost ready." He choked back a sob. "Not real, real, not real." The voice came from somewhere ahead of him. He stopped, breath shaking. Heart slamming, flashlight flickering. "Show yourself," Mark whispered. Lightning illuminated the field, and standing inches from him was himself. A perfect copy, dripping rain, eyes unblinking. But its expression, wrong. So wrong. The smile widened slowly, tugging the skin of its face too tightly, as if the shape of a smile was something it was still learning to perform. "You understand now," the mimic said in Mark's voice. "I don't replace. I become." Mark stumbled back. "No." "Your memories." The mimic tilted its head. "They're mine now." "I didn't give you anything." "You saw me. You heard me. That's all it takes." A pause, then softly, lovingly. "And now you're almost finished." Mark's knees buckled. The world spun like the field was tilting sideways. Thunder boomed. The mimic reached toward him. Mark tried to scream, but the field dimmed. The storm folded inward. The sound collapsed into static. Images filled his head. Memories not his own. A child hearing his father's voice outside the window. A deputy in 1972 breathing into his radio before vanishing mid-report. A woman in 1968 watching something that looked like her son walk out of the tall grass. Dozens of memories. Hundreds. Thousands. All victims. All replaced. All screaming inside the mimic. Mark felt his mind slipping, reality bending. The mimic stepped closer and whispered, "Come home." He tried to run, but the corn twisted into a maze around him, rows shifting, blocking, repeating, looping. Time stuttered. Rain fell upward for a moment. Lightning flickered in a pattern, long, short, long, like a heartbeat. Mark felt everything collapse inward. His name echoed in 100 overlapping voices. Mark, 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 Mark. A sharp, sudden snap of light, and then silence. Hours later, maybe minutes, maybe years, the sheriff arrived. Alone, soaked, pale. He found the cruiser empty, the field quiet. He didn't call it in, didn't search the corn, didn't even say Mark's name. He only whispered, "I'm sorry," and walked away. Mark Ryland was never seen again. But something that looked like him, like a heartbeat fading into a tunnel. If you've listened this far, you already know more than anyone was ever supposed to know. Deputy Mark Ryland vanished on October 28, 2001. He left no note, no resignation, no sign of a struggle. No body. The sheriff's department declared him unaccounted for, closed his locker, packed his things, never reopened the file. But that wasn't the end, not even close. 3 weeks after Mark disappeared, something strange happened in Dane County. People started calling the sheriff's office with reports of a man in a deputy uniform walking the fields at night. They said he moved strangely, his posture wrong, his voice off. One man said he saw the deputy walking along the road, soaked to the bone from a storm that wasn't happening anymore, rain dripping from his hair even though the night was clear. Another said he saw the deputy's patrol car parked outside his barn at 2 a.m., engine running, headlights on, but the driver's seat was empty. A woman said she heard a knock at her back door. When she asked who it was, a voice that sounded exactly like hers answered, "I'm you. Let me in." The sheriff refused to send anyone to investigate. He retired shortly afterward. Older than he looked. Fragile. Afraid. He spent his final weeks in a care home, mumbling to himself, repeating a phrase over and over. "I hope the thing wearing me does better with my life than I did." Then he died. And whatever he feared didn't die with him. I told myself I wouldn't play the tape again, wouldn't let it echo through my house, wouldn't risk hearing the whispers that almost drove Mark insane. But last night, I woke up to a voice calling me from the hallway. A voice I recognized. Too well. My own. "Come here," it whispered softly. "Come look." I froze. Didn't move. Didn't breathe. Just listened. The voice sounded exactly like me, but there was something underneath it. A second voice, or a third, layered, distorted, like someone trying to harmonize with themselves and failing. I didn't go into the hallway. I locked my bedroom door instead. And then I heard footsteps walking away. The next morning I found something on the floor outside my door. A single footprint. My size. My tread. Pressed perfectly into the carpet. Except I hadn't stepped there. I know that for a fact. Since then, I've been seeing things, little things, in the mirror, in the corner of my eye, shadows that stand too still, reflections that don't turn when I do. Tonight, while recording this, I feel something behind me. Not close, not touching, just watching. Waiting for me to speak long enough for it to learn the way I breathe between sentences. I keep telling myself it isn't real. I keep repeating Mark's words. Not real. Real. Not real. Real. But the more I say it, the less sure I am. Because the air feels wrong. The house feels too quiet. And the static noise you've been hearing in the background? That isn't my microphone. It isn't the tape either. It started 10 minutes before I sat down to record this. Just a faint hum at first, then louder when I said Mark's name. It's louder now. Much louder. Wait, hold on. There's someone outside my door. I can hear breathing. Slow, careful, not trying to scare me, trying to match me. I know what it wants. I know how this works now. It can't enter until it understands me, until it finishes copying, until it can step into my life cleanly. I shouldn't talk anymore. I shouldn't give it more to learn. But I need to finish this. I need to warn you, because if you've heard this recording, if my voice is in your ears right now, then something else is listening too. Something that knows your name. Something that knows how you breathe. Something that's been learning humans for decades. It's patient, smart, hungry, and it only needs one thing to find you. A voice. Your voice. My hallway floor just creaked. I'm God. It's whispering. It's whispering my name through the door. Soft, gentle, perfectly matched. It sounds exactly like me. A better version of me. A version with nothing left to fear. I think it knows I'm almost done recording. I think it knows I'm giving you everything it needs. I shouldn't have done this. I shouldn't. Something just slid across the floor. It's right outside. I'm not opening the door. I'm not looking. I'm not. Okay. This is it. I can hear it breathing now, matching me, becoming me. I need to stop talking. Before it learns enough, before it knows how to wear me, before... And if you're hearing this, it already knows you. You don't believe me, do you?